Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of the podcast, and I've got a guest on with me today, David Griffiths, a long-time advocate of tactical voting, very active in using the argument to remove the SNP, and has been a candidate himself in the past. So first things first, David, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for covering a bit of your time today. How are you?
Hi, Craig. Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on. I think it's high time we had a little one of these chats. Yes, so good.
Now, you and I spent a bit of time together in the run-up to the election. We were both saying the same thing. That was a general election last year where we wanted to inflict as much pain as possible to the SNP, and the result came out at 9 seats. First thing, was that a surprise to you?
Well, yeah, I would say it was a pleasant surprise. I had said in the lead-up that I thought it was very, very likely that the SNP would get no more than 17 seats, say. And I looked at the seats I thought they could win, and I genuinely couldn't see them winning any others. What I didn't realise was that they would also lose some of those seats like Stirling and Ayr, some of the seats that you would traditionally expect the Conservatives to win, and the Conservatives clearly weren't going to win them. What I didn't realise was just how many people were going to go to Labour. So it was those, and there was one that Liberal Democrats won unexpectedly also. So that was a big surprise. The scale, just in terms of the drop in the number of seats, I expected to lose about 30, but to lose, what was it, 39? Whoa! So yeah, it was a surprise, but a very happy surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the expectation was they were going to get less seats than they started with, and my own personal target way out as soon as the election was called was if we could get them down to mid-20s, that would be fantastic because of the amount of money, etc., they would lose.
Yes.
So I remember celebrating that night, not the victory of Labour, but the demise of SNP.
Absolutely.
On the majority show, it was quite an enjoyable night, to be honest
It was
with
a very enjoyable night. Yes, indeed it was. And I think we were all in the same position that night. Did we absolutely believe in the new Labour government? Not really. But did we want somebody to be able to coalesce around a message and get SNP MPs out of Westminster? Absolutely. And that's what happened. Yeah. And so it was a cause for celebration, no doubt, from that perspective alone.
Yeah. But it could have been better.
Yeah.
In your own opinion, you're far more versed on tactical voting and how the polls work, how the voting goes, etc., than I am. So, what in your eyes prevented an even better result that night?
Right, two things I would say. There were a number of seats where it wasn't clear what the most likely party was to beat the SNP, and not very many, but a few. Aberdeen South was one, for example, where Flynn stood. Now, that was very close in terms of second place. You couldn't really tell which party was more likely to come in second. And the problem with that was the second place vote was split. So the result was that Flynn got in, and the Labour and Conservative totals were almost identical. Labour was slightly ahead. There was another seat in, I think it was Argyll and Bute, where there was a strong Conservative candidate, but it didn't look necessarily like the Conservatives would come second there. She came on, Amanda Hampsey, her name was, she came on very late on, and I think it was Brendan O'Hara that won that seat. So again, it wasn't clear until the last minute which way really to recommend people to vote. Now, as it turns out, the tactical voting guide, which I produced and which was very much done in conjunction with other groups, one in particular being Scotland and Union, we came up with a list of MSPs, or MPs, should I say, prospective MPs, who we felt were best placed to beat the SNP. And I think the numbers were, in the end, I think it was 6 Lib Dem, 10 Conservative, and what's the rest? 41 Labour. Now, as it turned out, of those 57, 9 came second to the SNP, and the other 48 won the seat. So, I mean, the tactical voting guide couldn't have been any better. We got everyone right. We either came first or second in each one. The only problem was in some, as I say, it wasn't too clear which way we were telling people to vote. So in Aberdeen South, for example, people said to me afterwards that I should have recommended Conservative. And I said, well, why? They came third. They said, well, yeah, but if you guys had all recommended Conservative, they might have come second. Possibly, but you can't really argue with those numbers, 48 and 9. So that was one reason why it happened. There just were a handful of seats where you really couldn't tell who was best placed, and the SNP was just a little bit ahead of both of them, unfortunately. So unless there had been widespread, almost mass tactical voting, it was going to be very difficult to win them. The second reason is, of course, there were some seats where a certain party, which was never going to win the seat, stood out a candidate, and that candidate took a lot of protest votes. And of course, I'm talking about Reform here, and that happened in at least 4 seats, primarily in the North East. Seats that should have been won by Labour or by Conservatives went to the SNP, and in those seats, if you took the addition of the second placed party, be it Labour or Conservative, add the number of Reform votes, then you're comfortably outstripping the SNP total, which just shows that the presence of Reform in those seats clearly made the difference and gave the edge to the SNP. Now, we can't expect parties not to stand. What I would say, though, is now that that's been identified and it's been made clear that the presence of a party that cannot win a seat, that can't come better than third place in the seat, does nothing but distort the balance of the election. And there is quite a delicate balance in Scottish seats, mainly. There'll mainly be either Labour or SNP, and a handful of seats that will be Conservative or SNP, and a handful of others that will be Lib Dem or SNP. The presence of a fourth, if you like, supposedly large and, if you like, with aspirations to be an even larger party in that mix, just distorts the balance completely, because the number of pro-UK votes, although it's in the majority, it's finite, it's limited. Maybe it's 60%. But if you take 60% against 30% and you split that 60% 4 ways, then eventually you're going to lose the seat. One party might get over 30, but it's very, very unlikely. So, short answer is, some seats it's too tight, it's too close to call, and the SNP will always win a few seats. But when you're adding another party that admittedly itself admits it can't win the seat, and they take a lot of votes, that's only going to benefit one party, really, because those people weren't taking votes from the SNP. They were taking votes from Conservative and Labour, and that was the problem the last time, and that will be the problem the next time if Reform continues to grow. Again, with this ceiling being in place, because they won't win a seat next year. They won't win a constituency seat. They won't even come second in a constituency seat. But they would tell you otherwise. No, our time's coming. It's not, guys. Not next year. It's not a chance. It's certainly not in Scotland. So those are the 2 principal reasons why it happened, and it could have been even better.
Yeah, so this is, bear in mind, we're only talking about 8 months ago, right?
Yes.
And we went from a result that was better than you and I had both wished for. It was hoping for mid-20s, you were sort of high teens.
Yep.
Got down to 9. Now, granted, it could have been down to about 5 if, you know, the way you've explained it, if Reform hadn't put candidates in those seats, basically, they would have come down to about 5 seats.
Yes.
So from a fantastic result that could have been slightly even better, right, to a position where you are today,
yep,
a year out from the Holyrood elections, and you have concerns. What's changed in that short space of time, David, and why are you concerned?
Right, very simply, I would say the perfect storm that existed last year from a Labour perspective is no longer there. Last year, the Labour Party had the great advantage of being in opposition to a very unpopular Conservative government in Westminster, a government that had just torn itself apart, constant rows. And the Conservative government had won 4 consecutive terms. It was time for a change. Everybody knew that. So that was the UK, or if you like, the England and Wales perspective. The Scottish perspective last year for Labour was that the SNP was even more hated, because they'd had a terrible few years. They'd had, again, issues with leadership changes. They'd had all the nonsense, all the pantomime of Sturgeon being arrested and her husband being arrested and now charged. So Labour almost couldn't lose last year. So everything was going in their favour, and they scooped the prize. Fair play, they did. This year, on the back of the first few months of fledgling Labour government in Westminster, making very unpopular decisions, presenting them poorly, communicating them appallingly, showing a complete lack of political nous, that has had the effect of making Labour look unpopular so early on into their campaign. The only government I can remember being so unpopular so early was Margaret Thatcher's first government in 1979. After a few months, unemployment was soaring, the money was being tightened, the money supply was being tightened, and everybody was saying, what the hell have we done? What have we elected here? And that's pretty much what's happening now. The only thing that saved her then was the Falklands War, and let's hope it doesn't take a war to turn around Starmer's fortunes. But that's mainly the thing that's happened. The Reforms continue to grow a little bit. Reform is fundamentally a protest party. They won a lot of votes last year, but they won 5 seats out of 650. So that gives you an example of the scale. They're nowhere near being a party of government, nowhere near. Now in Scotland, Reform is still growing, and they've had a couple of, at least one very high-profile defection. They've had quite a number of, in council, they haven't yet had an MSP or an MP defecting, but it could happen. We'll see. But their stock is on the rise, if you like, among the 3 parties, Labour, Conservative, Reform. In Scotland, they have been on the rise. My feeling is that has plateaued. I don't think they'll grow much more. I really don't, because I think Reform is fundamentally limited in terms of its offering and in terms of its message and in terms of its appeal. But they are now regularly taking 17% of the vote. And we've seen in council by-elections in Scotland that a strong Reform means a higher likelihood of an SNP win. And that's my worry. My worry is that a lot of people are very defiantly going to vote Reform, albeit in the knowledge that they probably won't win, but they're going to do it anyway because they keep saying it's time for change. And I always counter that by saying, but you won't get change. You vote Reform knowing that they're not going to win. All you'll do is make sure that the SNP gets in again, and then there'll be no change at all. So that's my concern, really. Labour has had a bad first few months. Labour is not in healthy shape in terms of polling nationwide. It's not in healthy shape in Scotland. It's second to the SNP at present, and Reform has overtaken the Conservatives in 3rd place. Now, the problem with that is the Conservative vote is very focused in Scotland. They get a lot of votes in the North East and the borders, and that's pretty much it. They get some in Ayr and some in Eastwood and some in Stirling and some of their traditional places, but they're not going to win any of them. Perth, so they get a few as well. But that's it. Reform will get votes through that. That's why the Conservative vote, although it's quite low in terms of percentages, because of its focused nature, they will still get those seats. Reform's vote will be spread right across the country. The only place they might not be very strong is Lothian, because they didn't show well last year at all. But that means they're going to be taking a lot of votes everywhere. And that, if you like, dilutes the effectiveness of those votes. Reform will not win a seat. That's cast iron certainty. They won't. It's my contention they won't come second either, because you can't point at a single constituency, any one of the 73, and say Reform will win there. So effectively, those votes are going to be wasted. And that is my concern. We have only a limited number of pro-UK votes in Scotland. We can't afford to give 17% of that total potentially away to a party which cannot win a seat. Because remember, in the constituency vote in Holyrood, it's first past the post. Doesn't matter how many votes you get if you come second. You might as well not have bothered, seriously. It's nothing to do with building a platform for the future. It's about winning that constituency. And if you give your vote to a party that you know can't win the constituency, you are literally wasting your vote, quite literally. There's no correlation between getting second place in a Holyrood constituency and where you show in the list. If you're second, you're nowhere, you're last. And that's my concern. I can see a situation where a lot of votes are going to go to a party which won't win a seat and which, frankly, won't help at all. It won't help anybody except the SNP. That's my big worry.
Right. Now, obviously, we're still a fair bit out from voting day and polls being changed, but I think polls, can show a direction of travel. You're far more expert on polling than I will probably ever be. But I see them as good barometer of any change in direction. But do you put much strength on the accuracy of polls, particularly when we're so far away from an election?
That's an extremely good point, because a poll is just a snapshot of opinion at any one time. It doesn't mean this is how people will necessarily vote. That's quite true. What I would say is last year, when it got down to the business end, when it got within the 6-week campaign period, the polls weren't bad at all. They were pretty close then in terms of the vote share. The difficulty with polls is translating that into how many seats that will necessarily lead to. So that's where polls tend to be a little bit questionable. Oddly, so you're right. I mean, you can only take polls so far, particularly a year. A year is a long time. A week is a long time in politics, as we know. Anything could happen between now and then. Absolutely right. So you've got to be a little bit careful about polling. Yeah. The only thing I would say is the Reform vote in Scotland really won't grow. It won't. If the people haven't gone over to Reform already, they're not going to now. They really won't. So I think last week's Supreme Court ruling has helped the other parties, Conservative and Labour, because it shows, if you like, that there is some element of common sense back in the frame now. So had it been that everyone else, let's say the Supreme Court had ruled against women and saying that a woman can include a guy in a dress or whatever it is these people claim, that would have helped Reform's case. But because it went with the way of common sense, it wouldn't do. So while you're quite right, polls at the moment, you can't really put much faith in them. You certainly can't make too many predictions on the basis of a poll now. It just shows a trend. But what did surprise me last time round was the online bookies, the online betting sites. They were very, very accurate. In practically every constituency in Scotland, because I only really looked at Scotland, I didn't look in England. I wasn't interested, frankly, what happened in England. It was obvious Labour was going to win. In Scotland, though, I was almost taking my lead on marginal seats from the bookies. And I don't know whether, I don't know quite how they got such good info, but they were the ones who called that seat in the West Highlands that the Lib Dems won. They were the ones who called Stirling for Labour. They were the ones who, what I mean by that is, towards the end, they had Labour as favourites in Stirling and in Ayr and in these Renfrewshire East as well, or East Renfrewshire. And these are seats that are very, very marginal according to polls, but then they all came in with thumping majorities for Labour. Not Central, East Ayrshire's another one. Right up until the last minute, people were calling that for the SNP, and the bookies suddenly had Labour favourite, and boom, Labour won. Labour got a clean sweep in Ayr. So, of course, they got a clean sweep in Central Scotland, apart from one seat in over in Edinburgh for the Lib Dems. So it was quite amazing, really. But the polls, they can't. You're expecting too much. People are expecting too much if they think an opinion poll can tell you every single seat and how it's going to go. It can't. All it can tell you is this is how the direction of support is going, and that quite often you get these pollsters who will say, "Well, our projection is this will mean blah 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 blah." But nobody predicted 9 seats for the SNP. I think the only person who did was Anne-Marie Ward. She did. Well done. I mean, I don't know how she did it, but well done. So you can't always rely on polls. You're quite right.
I think Anne-Marie's a spooky witch.
I think you're right, yeah. I think enough slots closed.
Because to get that, I mean, nobody was even dreaming of anything like that. I mean, I'd made my prediction early doors of anything mid-20s would be a great result.
Yes.
So anything south of that, I was delighted with. But I just
totally.
Anybody would have expected it to be so low. When I think the exit polls, did they have them in 10 or something like that?
They did, exactly that, 10. So they came in. I was just round the corner from me when it came in. I was standing watching, and I've got to say, I was nervous as a kitten because for months, as you know, I'd been saying to people, please vote this way, please vote this way. Mm-hmm. And it was that time just before, I think it's 10 o'clock, about the 5 minutes before, I was thinking, my God, what have I done? I've told all these people how to vote. Imagine if I've got it wrong. My God, my God, my God, my God. And it came up, the exit poll, I'll never forget it, 10. I was like, 10. Yes. So
it was a bizarre moment. I remember it well, and I broke out a bottle of malt on the strength of it.
Absolutely.
The most peculiar thing that night, I think Scotland was a bit different because we were people like you and myself who were looking to make an impact on SNP's control. Yes. So we were celebrating that. We were only celebrating a tenth of the result. But what I thought was remarkable was, love them or loathe them, Labour did a massive turnaround in seats from the majority that the Tory had to the majority that Labour had. It was a phenomenal result. But when you factor in the particularly low vote numbers, then you can read more into it. But what I said that night still sits a bit weird in my head, because if that was any other country at any other time, to get such a swing from power to take it away and to get such a majority at the other end.
Yep.
I would have seen street parties up and down the whole length of our country. If it was in Spain, you would have Madrid at standstill, and all these things. If France managed to pull off they're trying to go the other way, they're trying to go from left to right.
Yep.
All these, you would be celebrating in the streets, but nobody, absolutely nobody, was out celebrating a Labour victory. And what I found bizarre was that I found a bit weird. But the other thing I found bizarre was I think we all sort of recognised that Labour would probably not have a good government. But to actually make such an arse of things in such a record time, to me, it's just been absolutely mental to watch. But because they've made such a dog's dinner of governing, it's going to backfire, I think, on us. I mean, again, a year is a long time, but I can't think any way Labour could rectify the bad feeling towards them that they managed to create in such a short period of time. Am I being a fantasist there, or am I sort of reading the room right?
I think it's going to be very difficult for Labour at a UK level to, if you like, put right the damage, the self-inflicted damage that we've seen unfold in the last, what is it now, 8 months or 9 months now? Yeah. So that's going to be very difficult for them. I think in Scotland, there's a possibility that Sarwar and his team, assuming Sarwar remains as the leader, as I assume he will, it's possible they could distance themselves from UK Labour a little, and I suspect they might have to. They've got a year, basically. I remember seeing very early on in after the Labour election when they looked like they were breaking election promises. I haven't looked too closely at what Starmer actually said, because I wasn't following Starmer at all this time last year. But I'm told he said he would help with WASPy women, and then they decided, no, we're not doing it. I'm told he said that winter fuel allowance would never be cut, and then he cut it. And, it just looked awful. If you stand on platforms in which you then abandon, that's never going to look good. And people will take a long time before they forget that. We all remember Nick Clegg in 2010 saying, I'm going to Lib Dem, vote for us and we'll scrap tuition fees. And then at that time, tuition fees in England were £3,000. Then he was offered the Deputy Prime Minister in a Con Dem Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition, and he and his MPs gave their backing to a trebling of tuition fees instead, and that finished his career. Quite simply, the Liberal Democrats went from 60-odd seats to 8 in the next election. So people don't forget broken promises. Quite simply, they don't. So you're quite right. It's going to be very difficult for UK Labour to come back from that. And I think the only way that Scottish Labour can, if you like, get themselves back on the front foot is to distance themselves from a lot of the decisions that UK Labour has made. Because if you look at what they have said since they got in, there's very little there that people in Scotland would think, oh, there's something I like. It's difficult for them. But I remember saying very early on in Labour's new government, asking the question, could it be that UK Labour actually wants to see an SNP government remaining in Holyrood? Because it does, if you like, emasculate the SNP. When they're in government, they're not effective in as much as they can't manage. We know that they can't govern, showing that very clearly. They can't do anything. Everything gets worse under the SNP government. But when that happens, then it means that people realise just how ineffective the SNP government is, or the SNP party is. So could it be that the Labour is playing the long game, thinking, well, we'll keep the SNP there, let them have their victory in Holyrood, because that doesn't really matter, because they can't do anything anyway. If they ask for a referendum, they're not getting it. There's only limited damage they can do. Meanwhile, we'll set about trying to get a second term for ourselves in 4 years' time. It's possible. I asked a Labour MP that, and he said, absolutely not, definitely not. We want in to Holyrood. We've got to get the SNP's tentacles out of every facet of Scottish life, the civil service, the judiciary. We've got to get them out. So I think Scottish Labour absolutely wants to win. UK Labour, God knows what they want. I mean, really, they're acting so bizarrely. And it's the presentation of their policies as much as anything else. The fact that Starmer looks like he's just found a pound and lost a £20 note. Rachel Reeves is even worse. The way these people come across is just awful. Angela Rayner. What? Seriously? These are your top people? My God. So, no, really not good at all, Craig. So, no, it will be very difficult for them to turn that around, yeah.
So, if we can go back to July, and I know it's a bit difficult, the question I'm about to ask, because we have the odd situation where we have two different voting systems, one from the UK, which is first past the post, but we come up to Holyrood and we have a combination of first past the post and a bit of PR for the regional votes. So I know it's difficult to translate it right in to Holyrood, but if in July we had a Scottish election and people voted in the same manner, how would Holyrood have looked based on just transferring those types of votes into Holyrood? What sort of parliament would we have?
Well, we'd definitely have a Labour government without question in Holyrood, because they took, what was the number? Was it 30? Hang on, 9 plus 6 plus 5, which is what, was that 20? They would have had 37. They haven't got 37 MPs elected. 37 of 57 is whatever that is, 70% or whatever. So yeah, they would definitely have had the bulk of it. It wouldn't maybe have been an overall majority. In fact, I don't think it would have been. The difficulty is, of course, because Labour won so many constituency seats, that means in every region they would be hampered on the list, but they would still have got, you would assume, would have got a lot of votes on the list also. Reform would have got maybe some seats, maybe one or two possibly, and the SNP would have got, albeit a lot fewer seats in the constituencies, they would have got a lot more list seats, which should have impacted the number of Conservative seats, particularly because the Conservatives win the bulk of their seats on the list. So it would have been back to the old days, really, of Labour first and the SNP second, the old days of Holyrood, the 2007 days, and when the two of them were duking it out. Then, of course, come 2011, it became a lot more SNP first, Conservative second. So that's kind of how it would have looked. The list makes it, the presence of the list and that voting system makes it very difficult to call, because you do see an element of tactical voting in the list, and people who don't really understand the voting system don't accept this. You'll have heard this in the lead up, and you'll have heard it since. People saying tactical voting doesn't work because look what happened. We voted to get the SNP out and we got Labour in. But that just proves tactical voting does work. You can't say, I'm going to vote tactically to get one party out and then say, oh, it didn't work because I didn't get the party I wanted. It's not the point of tactical voting. The point of tactical voting is to get a party defeated. That's the whole point. Because what you're doing is you're saying, well, I wouldn't normally vote this way, but in order to make this happen, I'm going to vote for this party that I wouldn't normally do so. You can't then say, my God, that party I voted for got in. Oh, my God, how awful. Come on. It's ridiculous.
So what you're saying, if there was a Holyrood election and people voted in July and people voted the same manner, would we have had you don't think Labour would have got an overall majority? It would probably be...
The reason I say that is Labour would have got 70-odd% of the constituency seats. 70% of the constituency seats is it's about 50, right? And you need 65 to get an overall majority. It would all depend on how the Labour vote had held up in the list. And as I say, there is an element of tactical voting that goes into the list, but only when allied with tactical constituency voting. You can't really vote tactically in the list on its own. You can't do it because the number of list seats is governed by the number of constituency seats won. So you can't, in isolation, vote tactical unless you just can't do it. The reason I say that, for those who maybe don't grasp the intricacies of the list system, bear in mind that if you win, for example, like the Conservatives did last year, I think 4 years ago, the Conservatives won 4 constituency seats in South Scotland. And that means that when you win 4 constituency seats in one region, as it's called, then that means when you vote in the list, the number of lists votes you get is divided by the number of seats you won plus 1. So that means every vote you get in the list is worth 1/5 of the total that it would go if those votes went to another party which didn't win a seat in that constituency. You see the very same thing in all of the regions where the SNP won all the seats. Glasgow, West Scotland, Central Scotland, they won a clean sweep in all of these places. I think they did in Mid-Scotland, Fife. No, they didn't really. So what that means is if you win all the seats in one region, you're never going to win a list seat. It's impossible. You can't do it. And that's why the SNP got 1 million list votes, and that got them 2 seats. Whereas the Greens got 200,000 list votes, and that got them 8 seats. So that's 16 times easier to get a Green MSP elected by the list than it is the SNP. Bizarre, but that's how it works. So you can't really tell overall because the list is the list vote is such a function of the constituency vote. Yeah.
So the likelihood would have been we'd have got a Labour-controlled government, but possibly not a majority. If there's been a shift in people's opinions since then, and I think majority of that is to the unsuccessful Labour introduction to government.
Yes.
And we had that election today, and we used the sort of polling data today. What effect would that have on an election 8 or 9 months later?
Right. Today, if we have the sort of polling data we see now, SNP's in the lead with 30%, Labour's on about 23%. Then you've got the Reform on anything between 13 and 17, the Conservatives behind that, Lib Dems and Greens behind that also. What you would see is much the same in terms of the Liberal Democrat and Conservative votes. Liberal Democrats would get 4, 5, 6 or 7, and they will win between 4 and 7. seats next year, the Lib Dems, all in the constituencies. The Conservatives will win maybe 5, probably no more than 5 seats. That's if their votes hold up there. The Greens will win. That's the constituency. Then the SNP will win probably the bulk of the constituencies, with the Labour winning the rest. Now that would mean that numbers seats. If you get 30%, yeah, it's hard to say. They might get 30 or so, maybe the SNP, with about 10 or 12 going to the Conservatives and Lib Dems, and Labour the rest. So it's maybe possibly about 35 SNP, just less than 30 Labour, and about a dozen between the other two. However many that gives you. Does that give you 73? Somewhere around there anyway, I think it is anyway. Something like that, Craig. It would be something around those figures. And the list is where the real bun fight would happen, because the SNP would win fewer constituency seats, which means it would give them a chance of getting more list seats. The real problem there would be for the Conservatives with the presence of Reform. If Reform's on 17% of the vote, they're really going to eat into the number of list seats that the Conservatives win. So you'd see the number of Conservative MSPs probably halving, to be honest. Bear in mind, Labour's on about 25 at the moment. That would probably go up to about 35 to 40 in total, but the SNP would probably be on about 50. So you would just about have, you may not have even a pro-independence majority. You might have an anti-independence majority of Labour, Lib Dem, Conservative and Reform put together.
Staying up to date with events around the world can be difficult, where it's impossible to consult a single source for the full story. Narratives that shape public opinion often just reinforce media and corporate-backed vested interests. It's hard to know what information to trust. See what the media is exaggerating, sensationalising, over or under reporting. That's why I've been using Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that combines news from around the world in one place, so you can compare coverage. For every news source, you can see if it has any political bias, how reliable the reporting is, and who owns them. They even have a blind spot feed that highlights news disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. Take a data-driven view on the news and stay current. Get news from thousands of sources worldwide in one place. I've been using Ground News to help me get all the world's news in one place and give a more balanced opinion on what we read, and viewing who is telling us the truth and who isn't. Subscribe via my link to get 40% off the Vantage subscription. It's the one I use to get unlimited access to every feature. Your subscription can not only help my channel, but also help Ground News, as it makes the media landscape more transparent.
With a bit of Green and SNP on the other side. Now, where that would leave us, God knows. Can you imagine a coalition of Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem and Reform? Wow.
a bit bonkers. I think it's fair to say that when they thought up this way of the votes working up at Holyrood,
yeah,
I think the plan was that you would never have a majority government. I think
Agreed.
That's certainly
Agreed.
part of the thought process behind it. It's just really unusual that we've had some terms with SNP winning an outright majority. I think that's...
Yeah, there was one time, and it was 2011, and the main reason for it was, in truth, the Conservatives had just won the election in 2010. Labour had been beaten in Scotland, although they were the biggest party in Scotland. And I think everyone just realised in Scotland there is no point voting Labour anymore. The Labour vote fell off a cliff. Lib Dem vote fell off a cliff. The SNP got the bulk of their seats from the constituencies, but not as many as last time. They got about 48 constituency seats, but because some of the other parties won some constituencies, and because the SNP vote in the list was very large, they got a lot of votes in the list, so they got the 65, I think it was, seats that they needed. So it's happened once. And I think you're absolutely right. The whole purpose of the penalising or handicapping parties that have won a lot of constituency seats is to make sure that nobody wins all the constituency seats and all the list seats. That was the whole purpose of it. You're right.
So that takes me on to my next question, which is probability is we're going to have a hung
yes.
Right. So what happens next? Who does deals with who?
Indeed. Well, we've seen you've seen a load of nonsense in the press the last week since Farage said. Well, let's not forget, for those of you who've been on holiday, Nigel Farage in an interview last week said, whether in so many words or outright, he said he would prefer to see an SNP government in Holyrood than a Labour government in Holyrood. Now, That's really set the cat among the pigeons, particularly for people like me, because that just confirms what I've been saying for months. The only reason Reform has been standing constituency candidates is to enable an SNP win, because it's all that will happen if they do take a lot of votes in constituencies. That will make an SNP win almost certain. So, what's been the reaction to that? Both Reform and SNP have said, oh, no, we'll never do a deal with each other. That's not the point. Nobody's talking about you doing a deal with each other. What he's saying is, what Farage said very clearly was, he doesn't want a Labour government in Holyrood. And as no party other than Labour or the SNP has ever won a Holyrood election, that means, as he said, he would rather have an SNP government. There you go. So who would do a deal? Would anybody do a deal with Labour? Lib Dems probably would, to be honest, probably. Lib Dems will probably only win, as I said, 7 seats max, and they don't really tend to feature in the list. I think it's very, very unlikely they'll feature in the list at all next year. I would say they won't win a single seat there. Greens, I can't see them doing a deal with Labour. I can't see it. And there'll only be about 8 of them anyway, maybe 10, hard to say. Reform, that's the big one. Because if what seems likely does happen, it would appear that we are on track to see between 8 and 12, possibly higher, 8 or 12 Reform MSPs. That's the real interesting one. With whom would they do deals? Or would they just sit there and say, no, we don't agree with any of you? I don't know. It's hard to say. Labour Conservative coalition would seem very unlikely. It's very difficult to say. I mean, would anybody go into a coalition with the SNP? Well, certainly the Greens would have done, but whether they would now, it's hard to say. Now that Hums is gone and is no longer standing, I suppose Swinney, if he's still the leader, couldn't reach out an olive branch to them, hold out an olive branch to them. That's possible. What would the Lib Dems do? Would the Lib Dems go in with that little lot? I wonder, because they did back the budget after all. They did back the SNP's budget. So you never know. It's hard to tell with the Lib Dems where they'll fall. So what does that leave us? Certainly the SNP, the pro-independence parties would almost certainly go into a coalition, I'm sure. Alba won't win a seat. They won't feature, I'm sure. I don't think they're going to be a factor at all. So that just leaves the Greens and SNP. And they're looking likely to win certainly fewer than the 72 seats they had 4 years ago. So it's unlikely that the two parties together would exceed 64 seats. Unlikely. So they're not going to be able to form a majority. So even with a coalition, it's likely to be a minority government, unless whichever side of the fence, let's say the pro-UK 4 parties, and they are now 4 parties, of course, Labour, Conservative, Lib Dem and Reform, if they can exceed 65 seats in total, could you see a bastardised coming together of all 4 parties? I think it's unlikely. You could maybe. I can't see Reform going into a coalition with Labour as well as the Lib Dems. I can't see that happening because they're polar opposites. So I don't know what you would do. I mean, I suppose they could try and just muddle through as a minority administration. No party on its own could do it. They'd have to team up with somebody to get any legislation through at all. Otherwise, everything would just get tossed out. So, yeah, I think you might see some very unlikely bedfellows, but it's just possible that Labour would go into coalition with. Would they go into Reform? I doubt it. Would they go into Conservatives? Labour would see that as suicide, because remember, they're still getting the flack for being red Tories for standing on the same platform as the Conservatives in 2014. It's very difficult to see how they will do these things. You've got to remember, although they won't go into coalitions necessarily, outright coalitions, they might do backroom deals. That's possible. I'm sure backroom deals do take place right now. Like, for example, you'll never see a party standing down a candidate in a constituency, but they'll put up a paper candidate and they won't really back him and won't really bother to promote his or her campaign. And that way they don't really get many votes. So that's the sort of thing you might see in terms of standing. But in terms of coalitions, God, I don't know. What do you think, Craig? Can you see anything happening?
I think it'll be interesting. I think somebody, and if it was right now today, I think SNP would have a minority government.
Yes.
But God knows, and that's all down to, I think, the performance of Labour in Westminster. If they continue the attack that they're in just now,
yep.
I can't see many people want to vote for them up here if they continue to annoy people down in Westminster. So I think we're probably heading for a minority government. I don't see too many people doing deals. But one thing that did surprise me, and it's been in the back of my head for some months. I don't know how this or why this thought came into my head, but it did, and I'm going to struggle trying to remove it from my head. Paint a picture, Westminster, 4 years from now. I think we can agree that the SNP getting as little as 9 seats was a blip. There was a lot of protest there. I don't think that will be repeated. I think they'll get back up, maybe 20s, 30s, back to where they've, maybe close to where they've been for the last couple of elections.
Yep.
And we end up with a hung parliament in Westminster, but Reform have got the most seats.
Oh, don't.
So what happens there? Now,
Yeah.
we already know that Reform in January last year, until some of their members pointed out to them, were advocating a second independence referendum 2039. We know that their second in charge in Scotland is a nationalist who now tells everybody he's a unionist, and some people want to believe him and some just could see that as nonsense, because he too is advocating a second referendum in 2039.
Yep.
So if we do have the nightmare scenario in 4 years where we've got a hung Westminster, and the first crack of the whip to try and place a Prime Minister is Reform.
Yep.
Is it beyond the realms of possibility that the SNP would say, yeah, we'll not get into a coalition with you, but we'll then support to vote for your choice of Prime Minister, and in return we'll have a second referendum, thank you?
From Reform, I think Reform wouldn't hesitate, to be honest. I think Reform UK, as in Farage, would quite happily allow that to happen. He's never given any indication that he is anti Scottish independence. He's never really talked about it very much from what I can see. He did get involved in Ulster or Northern Irish politics last year when he they went into some sort of agreement with the TUV, but then Farage personally endorsed 2 DUP candidates, which seems bizarre, but that's seemingly how he is. Yeah, it would. So the answer to your question, if it needed SNP support to get, say, Reform's leader become Prime Minister, would Reform offer as their price a second referendum? I think without hesitation they would. Yeah, certainly if Nigel Farage was a leader, yeah.
Yeah, it would be a deal that would need both parties to satisfy their membership. And the only thing I can think of that would satisfy SNP members having Farage as an Prime Minister would be the promise of a second referendum.
Great.
I mean, that thought hit my head. My stomach went a bit funny, and I've never been able to take it out of my head. I keep trying to tell myself it's a ridiculous notion. Get it out of your head, Craig. It ain't going to happen, but I can't, because everything points to that. The fact that, Reform's behaviour, particularly on the constitutional question of Scotland.
Yep.
And the fact that, if you were to draw a picture of what you thought Reform should be and what they actually are, it's two totally different things.
Yeah, right. Exactly right.
The scariest one. The scariest one for me is the denial that they are for immigrants when all they talk about is stopping people coming in. But Farage is already on record as saying that there's no way at all that we would try and get rid of illegal immigrants already here. Yep. And that's a problem, because that's like 7 figures. We've got hundreds of thousands of illegals coming in, 6 figures every year. So if you stop one and don't deal with the other. But if you were not to hear that interview and you assumed the position of Reform on immigration, you'd go, oh no, they're totally anti-immigration, they'll deport everybody. But that's not the truth. And I think this is certainly an eye-opener for me, that's true in a lot of things with Reform. What you would think is their position isn't necessarily so. And it very, very disappoints me. I thought and hoped that Reform could be, at one point, the party we've all waited for, that all Scottish Unionists could, finally get behind a party.
Yep.
So much so that during the election, my decision was I was already going to stand for Holyrood, and once the election's over, I'll approach Reform and ask them if they would consider me as a potential candidate going forward. Yep. That's what my head was. And then the day before the election, the penny drop moment for me, the mic drop moment, very much where I realised they're no unionists. And I couldn't even vote for them now.
What was the moment that made you feel that way, Craig?
I get sent a newspaper report the day before the election. I think it was the Express, talking about all these nationalists that were up for election in the Reform Party.
All right.
And I actually, when I clicked the link to open it, I'd already decided that it was going to be a bullshit story, just a hit piece on Reform. Yep. But when I actually read it, and I thought, this is true, I spoke to candidates who were, in their own words, nationalists, in my words, separatists, who were Reform candidates. And I was asking them some serious questions like, well, how did you get through their vetting process? So what do you mean? I mean, did they not ask you your opinion on Scottish Constitution? Oh no, they did. I mean, did you lie to them? No, I told them I'm a nationalist. So, how do you that just and it's just blew my mind because, and I think a lot of people have went that journey, and a lot of people will go on that journey with reform where they held up to something, and I think that was more in hope than any evidence. Just thought, this is a thing, and then you think, well, hold on a minute, that's a bit odd, and then you start even digging deep. Just find out that the person that a lot within Reform Scotland wanted as a leader in Scotland is actually an anti-monarchist. Now, I'm quite acceptable with the opinion that you can being a monarchist and being a unionist are two separate things. True. And you can, no, don't have to be the same. But the majority of your vote would be what I thought Reform to be was very much the PUL community, as you and I would describe it, and that would be a core vote. But when you find out that the second in command in Scotland wants a referendum, the second in command's a nationalist, they had anywhere between 6 and 8 candidates in a general election that were separatists. You find out that they did have, until members complained about it, this bit on their website advocating a second referendum in Scotland in 2039, and you put all this together and it blows your mind. You think, well, that's not what I thought they were. And then you go back and you think, well, Nigel Farage has never once said he doesn't. Well, I think he maybe did during the referendum 10 years ago, but certainly since he's been his latest incarnation as a Reform candidate, he's never come out and said he wants to protect the Union. In fact, his words when he talks about Northern Ireland are totally contradictory to protecting the Union, because his words are it's inevitable that one day there'll be a united Ireland. When Ben Habib spoke so protectively about Northern Ireland and Ulster, and he's now since spoke out to say that Nigel Farage refused to endorse and support him when he was on that battle. You think, well, that guy doesn't care. And where my head is now is, I think at the heart of it, and I don't have a problem with this notion, by the way, it's an acceptable notion to me. I think they are more of an English national party than a British Unionist party. And I see the whole thing, the whole project, is just a vehicle to get Nigel Farage into number 10. And if that should be his motives, I don't have a problem with that. But it's just the amount of stuff where they say one thing and they actually mean another. You might remember after election, we're going to make it a democratic party. We're going to rewrite the constitution. We're going to have the members control it. And I'm not an expert in constitutions. It bored me to death, to be perfectly honest with you. But when I looked at the constitution that Reform presented and I read it, it took me all of about 5 minutes to realise the only person that can get rid of Nigel Farage is Nigel Farage, because he was making this big play about we're going to let the members vote on a couple of people onto a sort of managing board. But when you realise that he handpicked the other 3, plus himself, then you've got a 4-2 vote on anything you want. So, there's all this nonsense. And I think if Reform's true aims and true ethos, which I can see, that's fine. These things, even the way the party's structured, if who's to say having a party with a hierarchy system where we have one guy saying this is what's happening and that's it, and then you either join us or you don't, who's to say that's wrong? That might be great be doing it right, but that is what Reform are. But Reform paint the picture as democratic thing. It's if you just come in and say, no, this is now the Nigel Farage party, anything he says goes, or the people that put most money into the party get to dictate what Nigel says, because that seems to be the case. A lot of these things like Islam and things have completely 180 recently, and that's no surprise that his chairman is one of the biggest donators to the party, who obviously is a Muslim. So it's all just a bit weird for me, and I think if they just were honest about what they want, they would arguably be more successful, because you've got people like me who every week are doing videos about there's something else that's nonsense about Reform. You're going to spoil the Unionist vote in Scotland. I don't see them as a Unionist party.
I don't think we can anymore, Craig, see them as a Unionist party, because I keep making the point. Reform does not operate in a vacuum. If you vote Reform, there is going to be a reaction to those actions. If you vote Reform, that's a party that claims to have 17% of the vote in constituencies in Scotland. 17% is not a trifling sum. It is more than the Conservative Party won in Scotland in last year's general election, for example. They won 12%. It's a big amount of votes. We know they're not going to win any seats, and they can pretend otherwise all they like, but they're not even trying to say otherwise now. They won't win a seat, right? So that means they're standing for a reason. What can that reason be? It can only be to stop some other party winning, because they're not going to win anything. And if you're standing and you're not going to win, you're only doing it to stop somebody else winning. Who would they be likely to stop? Can only be Labour and the Conservatives. It's certainly not the SNP, because they're not taking votes from SNP, not in any meaningful number. So that would lead you to question what they are all about. Now, to pick up on your point, if you've got a party that is not vetting its prospective candidates sufficiently or even at all, then that takes you back to the same sort of situation that we saw in prior to the Supreme Court ruling, which is you've got a bunch of people who can say to you, yes, I'm a woman. Okay, what are the checks being done? None at all. I say I'm a woman, therefore I'm a woman. Right, great. Okay, well, you can go and use these single-sex spaces in, but make sure you're a woman now. You really feel like a woman, great, and you go then, that's fine. Right, now that is no different from Reform saying, oh, what, are you a nationalist? Yeah, well, never mind, I won't press you on the point. Okay, in you come, you can stand for us. There's no difference there at all. You know, you're either going to do vetting and do checks and stop people on the basis that they are, or they might be, who you don't want them to be, or else you've got no checks at all. And that's very much how it was with self-ID, which was never going to work ever. And it was very much how it would seem how it was last year with Reform, because they were letting any Tom, Dick, and whatever you want to call it in to stand as a.
That's not technically true, right? Because the truth is actually even more bizarre than that, I would suggest, David. The truth is they gave a 6-figure sum to Hope Not Hate to vet their candidates.
Oh, for goodness sake.
And when you think anybody that knows the history of Hope Not Hate, any other political party getting involved in them at any means is just ridiculous. So the fact that, but I worked it out with the amount of candidates they had, and they made this big play of, we put up X hundreds of thousands. I can't remember the exact figure, but it was 6-figure sum. And well, yeah, but when you divide that by the amount of candidates, it was about 200 quid a candidate. And I'm not sure how much vetting you can get done with 200 quid per candidate. But the maddest part of that story was that it was Hope Not Hate that they gave the money to. But this is this party that's, in the eyes of the public, the complete opposite of what Hope Not Hate are.
Absolutely.
You know, Hope Not Hate are sort of left very liberal minded people. So I don't know why anybody would want them to do your vetting for you when you're doing this standing behind the Union Jack and portraying this notion that you are for the great British public. And I keep saying that I use this as a prop often when I talk. See this here. See if you've got one of these or you're eligible for one of these, that should be your government's prime aim. The safety and the life of these people should be your prime. And if it's not, you're in the wrong gig. And if you're in America, you look after ones that have American ones of these. If you're in Bulgaria, and I think there's a few countries like Poland, maybe a good example, where they do that. They say, see if you've got one of these that says Poland on it, you're in priority.
Hungary also, agreed.
And you know, that's kind of where I think government's got to be, and it frightens me that we probably thought that's what reform were all about, but practice suggests otherwise.
Indeed, it does. And reform's utterances, reform's actions, certainly the whole way that Farage has the party set up, it leans far more towards what you said, which is more like a dictatorship, really, than a political democratic party. And if you like, the interaction I have with reform people online is all very much what they don't tend to do is debate, because I will say to them, you guys, you're not going to win seats. You realise this? Oh no, I don't think that's true. I think we've got a long way to go. There's a lot of time between now and the next election, now and the next election, and we are the ones with the momentum. So I think we have to wait and see. And I'll say, okay, so tell me what's your number one target? Or just give me the 10 seats you might be targeting. And that's when they clam up, because they won't talk about it at all. They will not talk about where they're going to win a seat, and that's because they're not going to win any seats. I mean, categorically, they're not going to win a constituency.
You've said that a few times. Then you've said how the split on the makeup potentially of Holyrood could be, and you included reform in that. Are you suggesting that when you say that you're talking about constitutional seats?
Definitely not. They will only
do you
win
think
lists.
they will get some lists?
It would be very difficult for them not to win list seats if their current vote holds up. It would be inconceivable. Going back to last time, the Greens won. What was the percentage of the vote? It was something like 6.9% of the list votes, and they got 8 seats. Liberal Democrats got slightly more list votes, but no seats. Again, that's because the Green vote is quite focused, really. So, yeah, they will win. The Reform, as things stand, if their current level of polling holds up, they will win list seats. That's the second vote for any of you guys who are not all that familiar with the Scottish election voting system. They will not win any first past the post constituency seats, simply because they won't beat the SNP in any constituency. Not a chance. Not with 17% of the vote they won. Now, remember, guys, the SNP in the last Holyrood election and in the last Westminster election, and in a couple prior to that also, have finished first or second in every constituency seat. Just think about that for a moment. They came in 2021, the SNP came first in 62 constituency seats and second in the other 11. Last year, they came first in 9 seats and second in the other 48. That's what happens in Scotland. The SNP is so big, it's like the 800-pound gorilla on the sofa. You can't ignore them. You have to beat the SNP to win a seat. Reform has never beaten the SNP. It's never even come second to the SNP in any seat. There's another election this week in Glenrothes. The Reform will not come in the top 2. They'll come third at best. That's just the way it is. And that's the way it will be next year. So to be absolutely clear, Reform will not win a constituency seat. It's first past the post, first vote next year, not one. They will, if their vote holds up, win some list seats. And it could be as little as 8, might be fewer than 8. But it will be around that number. If they hold up at about 15% of the vote, they'll get between 8 and 12. It just depends on how widespread the vote is. But yeah, so that's just to make it that clear. They will, if the vote holds up, win some list seats. If the vote collapses, then they might win none of them. But they certainly won't win any constituencies, no.
Okay. So just to wrap up then, what is your advice to Scottish people? And if you had the chance to speak to every single voter in Scotland, what would you be telling them?
What I would tell them is, guys, I can't tell you who you should vote for. I've never done that. What I will do is I'll say to you, I have a very, very clear aim in this life and what I do with my time on this planet. And most of my time is spent doing this stuff, crazily, but there you go. My aim is to get the SNP out of Holyrood. I think the SNP is genuinely evil. I think they pursue policies that are at best criminally irresponsible and at worst knowingly deadly. And I'm talking about their drug use policies there. As Anne-Marie Ward will tell you, these policies are keeping people trapped in the cycle of addiction. They are being encouraged to take more illegal, deadly drugs with all that goes with that, including how they acquire them illegally and what it does to them. And it's killing people. I think they certainly had deadly policies during COVID in terms of their use of care homes. So I think they have to be, firstly, taken out of office, and secondly, they must be made to face, held up to account for their deeds. So that's my firm belief. We have to get the SNP out. Now, what I can do is I can tell you how best to vote in order to get the SNP MSPs removed from office. And we proved that. Guys like me proved this last year when we came up with tactical voting guides, which, when followed, led to the loss of, I think it was 39 SNP MPs. This is a proven method to make it happen. So what I would say to everybody is, think about what you want. If you want to just cast your vote and say, that's it, I voted for the man I like best because I've got a mind of my own and I'm going to do what I like, fine. If that's how you want to use your vote, great. You're wasting your time 90% of the time, but crack on if that's what you want. I don't mean to sound patronising. It's true. When you've got a party, a situation where you've got a party that is good for at least 30% of the vote and you want them out, you don't get the luxury to say which flavour of replacement you want. What you have to do if you want that party out is you have to identify or listen to, be cognizant of the fact that there are people who spend a lot of time on this who will tell you with absolute certainty the best way to get that candidate out. And if you follow it, there's a 90% chance it will happen. If you want to do your own thing, you've got at best a 1-2% chance of you getting your own way. So that's up to you. So that's what I would say to people. Think about it. What do you really want from an election? Do you want to just cast your vote on the basis of your personal preference? or do you want to cast a vote to try to make the situation in Scotland better? And I think every right-minded person in Scotland who isn't a fervent gnat will tell you that Scotland will be vastly improved. Life in Scotland will be vastly improved if the SNP gets out. I, along with other people like Scotland in Union and like guys like Alan Sutherland, these guys, we can help you, the majority, you, Craig, as well. We can tell you how to vote to maximise the chances of getting the SNP out, and it will work. It really will. If people choose to do their own thing, that's fine, but just be aware you are massively, massively increasing the risk of another SNP government and all that goes with that, including 14-year-old school children being asked, have you ever had anal sex in Scottish schools? Because that's what the SNP does. If you want more of that, then vote reform if you want to in the constituencies, but be sure that's what's going to happen. And I'm making this a warning. I'm making it quite dark, deliberately so, because when you cast your vote for a party that isn't going to win an election, there will be a reaction to that, and it won't be favourable, believe me. So just think before you vote. Think what you're voting for. Think what the outcome's going to be. You want the SNP out? I'll show you how to do it, and it will work. You want to just do your own thing and throw the dice and see where it lands? Fine, but I can't do that. And that's what I would say to people. Think about it. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying to you, if you do it this way, you will get the result that I believe you want, and that's the SNP out. So please.
I think it's easy for people, you and I, that have unfortunately to live through 18 years worth of SNP control.
Yes.
When I talk to a lot of English friends and been on political channels or as a guest and things.
Yeah.
I try and sort of get them give them the general feeling in as few words as possible. And my new go-to is that in 18 months of power up here, they have managed to reduce the life expectancy of Scottish people.
Yep.
Now, if you can consider that for a minute, that'll give you some idea on how bad they are at governance.
Yep.
And before this general election in July, I would have happily and easily have said anybody is got to be better than them. The unfortunate thing for people like yourself who are going to advocate tactical vote again, and that the majority of seats in Scotland now in July, those that were like myself included that were advocating for tactical voting, we were asking some people to vote Labour, some to vote Tory, some to vote Lib Dem. There's this nonsense put about that Craig Houston told everybody to vote Labour. Well, I never told anybody to vote Labour. I voted Labour, and I regretted doing it at the time. I spent more time in that polling booth looking at this piece of paper, knowing what I had to do, than I've ever done in my life, because it made and I'd voted Labour before in my life, but the Labour I voted for in me as a person was a totally different person back then than what the proposal that was in front of me in July. But I've done it. I'm not proud to have done it. I feel I've done it through necessity, and I did wake up in the morning, the first morning for a long time, without an SNP representing me at Westminster, and that gave me a bit of desire. But the biggest thing for me the biggest win was how much we take money off of that party and short money, etc. So every cloud and things. But what I will say is the 8-9 months since have been horrific for Britain. And I think if there was an election tomorrow, I would be staying out of the tactical voting conversation, because I just genuinely don't think I could say to anybody, see those 40 seats, you need to vote Labour. I think I don't know if I could stand behind those comments this time. So it's a tough task. The only thing I think that's given us anybody a chance of not having another SNP government in Scotland would be the Labour Party becoming a lot better in quite a short space of time, and unfortunately I don't see that either. So I think if we are going to get rid of them, it's going to need to be a very clever and sellable, viable alternative to the Scottish electorate, or we will end up voting for the person or the leader or the party that we think's probably the least worst out of all the ones that are there, and then wherever that election finishes could be horrific. So I'm quite sure. And the other thing is, the SNP, I think they're incapable of making them a more votable proposition.
That's true.
But I do think they are well capable of making themselves at least a less favourable vote, because SNP have what we got, 14 months?
Yep. Oh, no, it's less than that now. It's a year's time. It'll be 2 weeks before the election.
Wow. So, we're sort of, we're coming to endgame, and I think it's impractical and impossible for SNP to become a better proposition for anybody in that space of time. But you know what they're like. I know what they're like. They could do a number of things to make them a worse proposition. And I think that's where my hopes are, that they become the Labour Party of Holyrood, where in the next 7-8 months they do some really stupid things and people go, no. I mean, if they were to, for example, put any pressure against the Supreme Court judgment, like if the Labour Party had some leaked WhatsApp messages last week, I'm sure you're aware of, which shows they are potentially looking at fighting against it. If the SNP were as stupid, then they could lose some votes. I just don't think they ever read the room with the gender stuff. And they weren't unique, by the way. It wasn't just the SNP that voted for that nonsense. Lots of parties did. And I don't think the SNP read the room there and realised that it was such a serious thing to the majority of people. So, my fingers crossed that the SNP managed to do a Labour and become even more bizarre over the next 6-9 months and make them less as getting a vote, and then we might see. I think the easiest alternative is for Labour to be the biggest party in Holyrood, but needing some favours for somebody else, and then to get a coalition. What that coalition will look like, God knows, but a coalition that's not SNP, and that way, whenever you have a coalition, you need to get more centralised ideas from the parties, because nobody's going to say jump into bed with Labour and say, yeah, we'll 100% agree with everything you say. So they're lunatic. It's a word I'm looking for. Stupid. Lunacy. Policies and stuff gets dragged more central, and that's kind of where I hope we are. Whatever we get to Holyrood, what I want more than anything else is a parliament that says, do you know what? We're going to take the book of devolved powers, we're going to wring it dry and not use them. We're going to abuse those powers to make Scotland a better place for the people in Scotland, and do things like not talk about Gaza, not talk about referendums, because these things are not in those book of devolved powers.
Absolutely.
The Supreme Court proved to Nicola Sturgeon not that long ago that even Holyrood will not be deciding when we have another referendum. So why we want to spend any time in that place trying to make Scotland better and want to talk about idiotic things that you can't control? God grant the serenity to accept the things I cannot change.
Indeed. I mean, we saw it yesterday. You're quite right. I mean, somebody's got to get a focus back on Scottish matters in Holyrood, and that doesn't mean the fight for independence. It's just how the SNP has taken its power and abused it, and it's disgraceful. And they've got civil servants happily doing their bidding. We've got to stop talking about Gaza. It's got nothing to do with the Scottish Parliament, nothing to do with the Scottish population. If you feel that badly about it, guys, write to your MP in Westminster and see if you can get foreign policy altered. That you can't do it in Holyrood. Similarly, but this is what they love doing. If they're not talking about Gaza, they're all taking jaunts to New York. Yesterday, for example, another one yesterday, we heard the news that His Holiness the Pope had died. And I said, watch out. Here's a countdown. You're going to get a very emotional tweet from John Swinney any second. Wait till you see. And then, lo and behold, 2 minutes later, up it came. Oh, it is with deep regret, blah, blah, blah. Right, that's lovely. Okay, but it's nothing to do with you, okay? And you know that on Thursday in First Minister's questions, he'll stand up and he'll say, it is with great sadness and sorrow that I note the passing of His Holiness. Oh, just stop it, all right? Just stop it. That's just performative play acting for a portion of your electorate to whom you feel you must make that point. It's ridiculous. It's just cheap. It's got nothing to do with the Scottish Parliament, whatever.
Yeah, I add that that's the Roman Catholic Church that asked their congregations to vote against Scottish independence.
Indeed, you're quite right. They did indeed. So yeah, I agree that we're in for a tough time next year. To sell the idea of Labour as a tactical vote is very difficult. But again, like you say, people say all I was doing is voting Labour. Yeah, that's why I told people to vote for 6 Liberal Democrat MSPs and 10 Conservative MSPs. 6 Liberal Democrat MPs, not MSPs, MPs. All 6 Liberal Democrats won. 5 of the 10 Conservatives won as well. Why did the other 5 not win? mainly because of reform. That's the thing. So if you want to see that repeated next year and want to vote Conservative and see them come in second instead of first, great, guys. All you got to do is say to your friends, yeah, vote reform. You do that. It's a great idea. So tactical voting does exist as a premise, and it wins elections. Is it a hard sell this time round, particularly for Labour? Because Labour almost certainly, in fact, definitely will be the party which will receive most of the tactical voting guide nominations and recommendations. Is it difficult? Yeah, you're damn right it's difficult, particularly against the backdrop of a very unpopular UK government making very, very bizarre choices. Doesn't mean it's not the right answer, though, guys. If you want to get the SNP out, and they're the biggest party, you can't do it. You cannot beat the SNP by voting for the party you like best and hoping for the best, because it's not going to happen. It will not happen. That's how the SNP won elections in 2007, in 2011, in 2015, in 2016, 2017, 2019, 2021. That's how it happened. And it will continue to happen if you carry on and say, please, please, please let the Conservative win in Hamilton or Greenock. It's not going to happen, guys. It's not going to happen in your lifetime. Stop it, seriously. If you want to vote for a party or want to vote for a candidate that cannot win, crack on. But don't complain when you don't get the outcome that you want. It's not going to happen. So it's really as simple as that. I know it's a hard sell, but nothing's easy in this life, as you know. So if we want to get the biggest party out, you either have to make another party more popular, which nobody can do except the parties themselves, or you have to say, right, knowing this is the limitation of these stats, how can we get them out? Boom, right, this is how we do it. And that's how you do it. And there is no other way. I'm sorry, if there was another way, I would be recommending that. And if Reform could win seats, I'd be recommending them, because I'm all about who can beat the SNP. And you'll see some Reform candidates saying to me, you're just shilling for Labour. Shilling. That's a good one. And, I can't wait to see the list of candidates for Reform next year. I'm just going to wonder if anybody who's been using the term shilling is going to be standing themselves, or maybe going to have a spouse standing themselves, because that's going to be very interesting for me to notice that. So yeah, I'll just remember the use of that word, guys. But anyway, I'm not doing this to fight with people. I will put my case very vociferously, as you know, as I always have done, Craig, whatever the subject matter, and I know you'll do the same. But I genuinely do. I have the ability to foretell what will happen in an election. I see it very clearly, and I know what the trends are. I recognise the trends, and I know which way the votes will go. And if you want to listen and want to go along with that to make a certain eventuality happen, that is get the SNP out, stick with me, because it will happen. You want to see, to hell with that, I can't possibly go with that, but then, guys, I'm not sure I can help you. But all I can do is keep telling you what I think is the best way to make it happen, and I won't stop doing that, because I can't. I have to do this.
Well, David, nice talking to you. Thanks very much for your time. Good for your ambitions on getting people to practically vote in Holyrood. I think it's a tougher ask than the proposition was at the GE, but I wish you luck with it.
Thank you very much.
Because nothing would make me happier than a non-SNP government in Holyrood. And as you know, I'll be standing for election and I would love to spend 5 years up there getting right in about them.
Well, just all I would say is, when you know exactly where you're going to be, what you're going to be doing, just let us all know, and I will be giving you whatever advice I can, and I will be giving whatever backing I can in addition.
Yeah, as I can only say, if the election was today, because things could change tomorrow.
Yep.
If the election was today, then I would be standing for a regional seat in Glasgow.
Yep.
Where I think I would need between 15 and 20,000 votes.
Right.
That's a big number, but when you factor in, you would probably need about 12 to 15,000 votes to win a constituency seat, and Glasgow has 9 constituencies in the region.
That's
when
right.
you work it down and you're looking for 15 to 2,000 per constituency, I think it becomes a far easier and more likely proposition. So, but that things could change. My original notion was to stand in the constituency that I live in, which is Hamza Yousaf's, my representatives, unfortunately. And that was to be nothing more than an annoyance, and just so I could stand on a platform. I think, to be perfectly honest with you, but he's since said that he's not standing for election. So I wouldn't have that challenge on me. And to be fair, I would have probably been standing against them and telling somebody to vote for somebody else in the constituency vote and just give me your second vote. So that would have been, I think that would have caught the imagination of the public and, the media, etc. So that isn't going to happen, unfortunately. But if the election was today, I'd be standing as a list seat candidate for Glasgow Region, with one added in brackets, but that could change.
That could change. Well, very best of luck. I mean, your numbers are about right. It will take approximately that number of votes. It's possible. You just got to get yourself out there, get your message heard. And, Glasgow is quite a cohesive regional unit. So it is possible you could get votes from everywhere. It's not West Scotland, which is where I stood. It goes all the way from like Irvine all the way over to Lenzie. It's like, wow, that's a lot of people to reach. Whereas Glasgow's a little bit more of a captive market. So listen, best of luck, buddy. I wish you well.
Thank you. And I've got a wee bit of work to do between now and then. I'm just waiting for work back on the proposed election process for SNP to have their first ever Scottish leader. I'll be putting my hand into that. It may lead to a contest. It may be uncontested. I don't know. But hopefully, and that's when I feel I can then, once we do that, and hopefully it goes the way I hope it will, then I think that's when I can then start turning the volume up. As it stands just now, on the interim chair of the Scottish branch, but the way our constitution is, it allows us to go down this route and have a leader, and it changes some of the things we can do in Scotland as a branch. And one of those things is, one of the things that attracted me to the notion, if we have a policy, if we don't have a policy in place that's a devolved power, the Scottish branch can dictate that policy.
All right, okay.
Which I thought, well, that's quite good, because things that are a wee bit odd, just in peculiar, just to Scotland, then we can make easy influence in that. And we don't need to go to our NCC and convince a dozen people that, 9 of them have got, I'm not saying this, they do like Scotland and stuff, but their interest is Yorkshire or Humberside or whatever. So if we get this thing done and they become the leader of the Scottish SDP, then we can have a bigger impact as well on even the policies for our party. So it's quite exciting. So hopefully we can get that done in the next few weeks. And then I feel as if I can then start turning the volume up about Craighcouston and SDP and start the long run into Holyrood. When I say long run, I know I'm not naive enough to that will go like that. And someday soon we'll be going, shit, where did all that time go? What about all those things I wanted to do to campaign? But so that's kind of where hopefully over the next month anyway, we can get all that done and dusted, and then we see a slightly different Craighcouston in the front end.
Well, I mean, I think the advantage you've got is you're well known anyway. You were well known to at least one section of the electorate and the demographic already. But you've always spoken your mind. You've always gone out there and said what you think. You've put your head above the parapet numerous times. So I think the fact that you're visible now probably gives you a head start. I mean, can you name a single Reform candidate in Scotland next year?
Well,
I know. Go on.
Actually, Reform, I don't think it's about the party. Reform seems to be about the personality. And again, that's something I don't really have a big problem with. I quite like personality politics. I like the whole Trump thing. I like the Nigel thing up until a few months ago. Even when I said I'm not going to get involved with Reform in Scotland, I still wanted them to do well in the rest of the UK. But I must admit, even that notion's changing a wee bit now because of the stuff going, what do you do? Do you know Nigel Farage? See if he wants to be the next Prime Minister of the UK. What he should have done after July 2024 is do nothing. That would have probably given him the best shot of doing it, but he didn't do nothing, and anything that he does do seems to work against him. If he'd have just shut up for 4 years, he'd have probably been in a better position to be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, which is inevitably what he wants out of all this.
I think you're almost right.
He's involved in, not really being that clear on, he does a headline, we'll stop immigration. Well, aye, but what are you doing about the people already here? He doesn't want to talk about that. And you go, and then all the carry on with Rupert Lowe and all that noise, and you just go, why don't you just shut up?
Exactly.
You had it, the public were with you, but now, and a lot of people, I feel, are using it and they're grabbing onto it. And this one thing I have heard numerous times is we need to end the duopoly. And I say, by doing what? Creating a triopoly?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of doesn't make much sense to me, but they are what they are, and what will happen. And to be honest with you, the mad thing is, if you put all the potential prime ministers up in front of you, you would probably still pick Farage. He's the worst bet in a bad field.
Indeed. Indeed, but
Anyway.
we'll talk more about this in time. But anyway, good luck with it, and I'll look out with interest to see what your plans are. So
Thanks. Well, thanks very much for your time, and we'll speak soon, no doubt, and we'll have you back on loads, I would imagine, between now and Holyrood going in May 2026.
Fantastic, Craig. Okay, so best of luck, and let's hope this and a slightly other matter. Let's hope this takeover goes through seamlessly very quickly.
Aye, that would be quite good. Right, okay, well, be good, David. Have a good day and speak soon.
Thanks a lot, Craig, buddy. Cheers.
Right.
See you soon.
There you go, folks. That was David giving his words of wisdom. David, obviously, very specialised a lot in polling and the data-driven side of things, and he's been round the block a bit with the politics himself, so somebody that always will listen to and take on board what he's saying and appreciate his input. So if you want other people to see this, you want other people to hear what David was saying, you can do 1, 2 or 3 of the following things. Click the thumbs up button, that'll take you half a second. Put some comments below or hit the share and share it with your friends and family. If you've not already done so, please consider subscribing and hit the notifications bell to the channel. But the most important thing, more important than all that, unless you're the type of party that want to deceive the good British public by telling them you're one thing and it turns out you're another, then no you. But
everyone else, have a great day. Cheerio, bye now.